Hey, yo, Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. That devil, what would we call it? The devil currency, Bitcoin, decided to have a fit just before we came online. So I was scrambling, buying, selling, moving things around, and praying.
That's crazy.
Yeah, praying that I'm not so good.
I don't know, like I tend to avoid it on weekends. On weekends, it's like a turbulent little child.
Yeah, but since China's out, that communist state of China, everything's much better. It doesn't do that weekend thing so bad. My wife said to me that I mustn't have this too low because it's not a good angle. I said there are no good angles with me, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, the reason for me actually scheduling and wanting to have this discussion is because I've encountered online a lot of this. Coming especially from theists, they seem to have this idea that atheists are incapable of having a moral system because they have this idea that morality comes instilled by some divine injection into humanity. And I mean, I've been looking into it a lot, and I'm trying to look at it objectively. And there's a lot of academic material that's actually been done on the study of morality within societies. And the conclusion that I came to is that morality is a product of societies, because it varies from society to society. I mean, granted, the big ones like don't kill one another, and don't steal your neighbor's shit. That's pretty much universal. But when it comes to the minutia, there's this sickly concept that religion has invented called sin, which is so linked up and tied with our sense of morality. The two, it's very hard to separate the two. I just wanted to have an open room and see, if anybody has some thoughts on this. And what I have discovered on both sides of the spectrum is such a diverse, smorgasbord of opinions and input from people. So, I think it should make for a lively discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, religion seems to just steal everything. They just put under new management. They put up the sign under new management, and they just call it theirs. It's a great job. We all know where Easter and Christmas and everything else. Those are just pagan festivals that are stolen and adopted. And as you say, the joke is, and I think we spoke about this before. Sorry, frog in the throat. The real joke is if you live by biblical principles, you'd pretty quickly go to jail. You can't. It's an absurdity because how could Bronze Age tribal desert dwellers? How can you import their morality from that time to this? Yeah, there's some commonality, as you said. The golden rules of don't murder, don't kill. I've got a house full of cats that I live with. One of them's about to jump up here, and they're capable of killing one another, and they just don't. Nobody told them not to. That's just innate. I think all of the philosophers, all of the great philosophers. Okay, he's going to come and get in frame now. I can't stop him. They've all said, can you imagine a society in which things like murder and rape and theft and all those things are cool? How could you build trust? How could you cooperate if you've intrinsically got a society that allows those things? So it's actually just natural selection. You can't possibly have. Simple as that.
It's so true what you say, because I think the societies that naturally select for cooperation and for societal well-being are the ones that end up surviving. And the societies where everybody has free reign to rape, murder, pillage, kill, and steal are the ones that end up going to the dogs and not surviving.
Yeah, because as individuals, we're very, very weak animals. We got thin skin, we got no nails, we got no teeth, we got no survival mechanisms. The only mechanism we've got is our sociability and our cooperation.
Yeah.
And you just can't build cooperation in an environment that is unpredictable. And the only way to build predictability is, well, you've got to have empathy to start with. We know that we've got in our brains, neurologists tell us that in our brains we've got mirror neurons. So I see you twist your ankle and I feel my ankle twist as well. And I get it. So I've got the capacity to be inside your head, and that allows me to predict what you're going to do next by looking at the expression on your face or your body movements. And that all just plays into the empathy, and from empathy we can build cooperation.
Right.
Can't be empathetic.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, once again, they're always on about their 10 commandments. I mean, their 10 commandments they're much better commandments to have out there. I mean, I can't rattle them off, but they're either very, very obvious, don't kill. In fact, I think does it say don't murder? I can't remember which. But they're not, unless you're killing for your God, then that's cool. You can do that. And don't steal. But I mean, the others are just don't covet and don't. What are the other ones? You'd know them.
Yeah, I mean, the where would Western civilization be without covetousness?
Yeah.
It would be the antithesis to what the Western idea of a utopian capitalist society is. If we don't have any drive to to do commerce and to better ourselves, it would be the exact thing that they would hate to see, which would be that utopian communist type of society.
And we're living at the very tip of Africa, which was inhabited by hunter-gatherers who didn't have their social fabric was not built up around coveting. I think I'm not misquoting when I say that they looked at. My cat's going to appear any minute. There he comes. Okay, this is the evening thing. This is where he spends his evenings. I think they considered ownership. They said was like the shade of a tree. It belongs to everybody but nobody. And that's just the nature. I mean, it would take an hour to get involved in their anthropology and in their culture, but they didn't need to be taught to love one another. They had plenty of love between themselves, and they didn't really have a lot of warfare. We moved in on their land. Of course, they shot us with poison arrows. Who wouldn't? But I think in and of themselves, they were peaceable people. So. The whole thing's sort of really a ridiculous moot point.
Yeah. This funny that you mentioned that, because I recently ran into an article. I mean, it was written in 2010. It's someone from the Center for Inquiry that was looking at some research. It's a Dutch primatologist and ethnologist called Frans de Waal, who did some research, and he is vehemently opposed to what he labels the atheist agenda, but the funny thing is his research exactly disproves, if you just take a step back and look at it. He wrote an essay called Morals Without God in a New York Times blog, and he says that let me just read this off here. He says science and the naturalistic worldview could never supply any meaning to life or answers to ultimate ethical questions. So in his words, he said, science is not in the business of spelling out the meaning of life, and even less in telling us how to live our lives, which is exactly what, that is my problem with religion. Like it gives it has these very grand idealistic schemes of this, society where everybody is just wonderful, and it actually doesn't play out that way. So the article here continues to where he says, it says, De Waal gives only two options to choose from: a world with lots of religion and morality, or a world with no religion and no morality. So he judges that we must prefer the first option. This forced choice makes no sense, though. Ironically, his own primate research opens the door to a third and a better option. He describes how chimpanzees sustain social relations using rules and mediation to help with communal peace and cooperation. So in his view, like that of Mark Hauser's and others, is that morality is far older than religion, as it emerged among the very early Homo lines that evolved towards Homo sapiens. It's plausible that the early Homo sapiens used their even larger and more socially oriented brains to contrive even more social rules for proto-morality, and all of that without the gods. So, this is something where I found that religion tends to inject a carrot and stick mechanism, by giving you the problem, which is the sin, and then giving you the stick to whip you from behind into shape. And it's all a control mechanism, because essentially, like you said with the 10 Commandments, the big ones are just don't kill, don't steal. The rest of them are all these injunctions to grovel and beg to the celestial teapot in the sky without any actual context or social justification. And the thing is, what I find very telling is how morality has evolved. And if it was the edict from above, then surely it would be universal, but you only need to travel to another country to realize that morality is generated by societies. And even within your own country, you can encounter pockets of people, maybe not necessarily isolated, but people who tend to move and, move in different social circles. They all have subsets of different behavioral codes and ethical codes. I mean, you can simply compare someone from Johannesburg to someone from Cape Town to realize that they're, like as soon as you put some geography between people, then these things have a way of developing organically within a society.
Yeah, there's a drift. There's sort of a cultural drift, but
yes.
But it's such a these things go to a time that these, as you said, moral injunctions go to a time before we had laws, before we had constitutions, we had police forces, we had judiciary that take those functions now that manage us. I was going to say, with Francis de Waal, I never knew that I've read quite a few of his books, and I never knew that he trod onto this topic at all. And I am surprised to hear his angle, which is a bit strange. I mean, I'd go with Sam Harris. I don't know if you've ever seen Sam Harris did a TED talk. I think he's done 2 TED talks. And he said, can science tell us about ethics and morality? Was one of his TED talks. Well, really, really well worth watching. A 20-minute TED talk of his, and just brilliant. Sam Harris everything he does is fantastic. So, and I mean, I couldn't do justice paraphrasing it at this point. Just well worth looking up. Sam Harris TED Talk, morality, fantastic.
Yeah.
And then I mean, there's the problem is you and I agree. There's not a lot to talk about. We need somebody here to disagree with. Is really what we need. So and I mean, we could, what we could actually do is pull up one of those videos where, I'm not saying now, but at a later date, we maybe could pull up one of those firebrands who are going through it all and moralizing with their religion. And it's always strange because their moralizing always somehow ends in a mess. Underneath it all, they are holier than thou, but then there's all the pedophilia going on. There's all the things that they're doing. You had the one last week where the preacher was sticking his head up the woman's skirts. I don't know what he was up to there, but it probably wasn't good. They're crazy. And then the other ones, they want to and they generally are, in my opinion, or my experience, is they're generally morally lacking, but they're always talking about it, paying lip service. I've been an entrepreneur for 35 years, and I've been taken to the cleaners a couple of times, as happens if you're in business. And I'm a trusting guy, so I always imagine people don't treat me the way I treat, and I do handshake stuff and that, and it's a big mistake. And I'll say without a shadow of a doubt, I've dealt with Muslims, I've dealt with Jews, I've dealt with atheists, I've dealt with Christians. And the one group that over and over, I will no longer ever work with one. If you show me, if you talk about Jesus in a business meeting, the meeting's over, the business relationship. Because that is just like, watch the birdie, and they're going to smack me with the other hand every single time. They're the worst. And the more they talk about it, the more they put cross out on the outside here, the more there's a Bible in close proximity. We're done. I don't deal with you any longer, because it's to get me to put my guard down. And it's too many times I've seen it.
Exactly. But that's the thing about this whole, biblical morality concept. It's that it's retroactive. Like it's almost like they. How can I put it? It's the biblical morality is not from the start to the finish. It's from the finish to the start. So they applied retroactively. If something doesn't fit in with their morality, they'll massage it in some way. It doesn't start from the position of this is how I should enter something into and approach it with these morals intact. It's more of a situational thing where this happens, and then, okay, how do I apply my morals to it, or how do I apply biblical morals to it? And I think that's the harmful thing about it, is that it's morality, in my opinion, is something that's fluid. It evolves with societies. 100 years ago, there was a completely different moral landscape. People shrieked at things which we take in our stride today. So it's definitely something that's malleable, and how can I say, when you take a religious dogma and you insert it into something like that, it doesn't. Religion is by its very definition not malleable. It's very rigid, control structure. And this is, I suppose, where that where the rules of engagement comes in, where this whole concept of sin, I think, is something that's it just degrades the human experience to such a degree where we become these I guess almost like automatons. There's no a spark of creativity or free will, because that you have to fit into a certain mold of behavior. And secular morality, in my opinion, is a far superior framework to base your outlook and your view on life and society in, because it is adaptive. It'll adapt to situations.
Yes. And it's also negotiated generally, and we generally tend to turn to the experts in every field. So you pick a very prickly topic like, say, abortion, in terms of morality, very, very prickly. Because first and foremost, you've got a woman, and I'm not one, clearly, their chemistry, their hormones. So the mother has to come first, and then we turn to medical science and we say, well, when does consciousness enter into the scheme of things here? And we work backwards from there, and we learn to turn to lawyers, we turn to doctors, we turn to all kinds of people, and so we build the case from the bottom up. And we build the law and the morality around that, whereas the others, from the top down, and the top down being, generally a priest who has got no training and no actual knowledge, who is appealing at best to morality from hundreds and thousands of years ago, when they didn't know anything. I mean, I've said it before. You've never met a person as backward as the people who wrote the Bible. You couldn't They stuck. They lived in a little hollow in a desert back then. It's not their fault. They just didn't have access.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we just shouldn't take them that seriously. It's just daft. I mean, it's ridiculous that we're sitting on a Sunday night, even having to discuss this. That we are still held. We're still held slaves to this backward thinking. It's just staggering. And the thing that pisses me off, though, is that they love to appropriate what's naturally occurring in humans by way of natural selection that had got into us and our cultures, and they love to go in and appropriate it and put the sign up outside and say, yeah, but no, we own love. You can't love unless you've come through us. What are you talking about? My cat just got on my shoulder and loves me. It's a
exactly.
And particularly when there was I'm just picking one example. There are millions of examples. The one guy that was caught, I think, one of these clowns 2-3 years ago. You can look it up. Look up Pretoria, and I think, was it a woman who had sex with a dog? And she shows up, of course, in Bible with the Bible under her arm, to come and defend herself, and says, no, she realizes now that God said that it was not a good idea. I could have told you that. I didn't need the Bible to figure that one out. That's not a good idea, So I've seen
this is the thing, this is the thing, like if religion is supposed to instill these morals in people and make them these paragons of virtue in society, it's not fucking taking. It's not taking. It's something wrong.
This is what he does in the evenings. I sit and work and he falls asleep up here. It's very cute. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we clearly, I was going to say we're fighting our nature, but we've got lots of natures. We don't have one nature. We are a prey species that became predators. So we were prey of these things, of the bigger versions of this guy, on the one hand, and we were also predator species. We sat somewhere in the middle of all of that, and the secret of our success is that on the one hand we cooperate, and on the other hand we don't. And we've got this bell curve where most of us cooperate most of the time, and that's good. We build, but then we've got the outliers who are anything. They do drive us forward. The Genghis Khans of the world, the conquering spirit, the bastards who we want to eliminate from our society. That said, they drive us forward. They are the sociopaths and so on, but if it was left to you and I, we just sing Kumbaya all day long. We just want to be nice guys. Don't want to hurt anybody. Those guys go and they make waves, and we need waves to go forward, unfortunately. And I don't know why this is so difficult to grasp for some people, evidently.
Yeah. I don't know, like for me, it just comes down to that there's a certain mentality within religious people. I don't get me wrong, like I don't have anything against religious people. They, do your thing, just don't ask me to do your thing as well, but there's this sickly sense of servitude, like there's this desire to be a slave, like to abdicate your responsibility, your thinking, because of this perceived source of morality, and I find that particularly disgusting and sickly, because what it does is it creates this, like I said, a slave mentality where people don't want to think for themselves. They don't want to objectively look at something happening within their society, within their surrounds, and assess it and say, like, what is the harm? What is the benefit? It always comes down to that one rant where the woman goes, I don't care about your fucking book. Your book says this. Your book says this. I don't care.
No.
And I mean, it's time. If only people could update, these religious texts, because they infect our sense of morality. And the reason I wanted to have this discussion was just because of this whole concept of sin. Like, what is sin at the end of the day? Like, it's a control mechanism that's built into the religion. Because firstly, you have to there has to be some way for the small number of priests or clergy or monks or whoever seems to be in charge of the religion du jour, that there needs to be a control mechanism, and what better way to control a population or a group of people but by giving them a moral code or a moral set of instructions. And now in that control, you have to build in some kind of a penal system, so there has to be, for those who transgress this, so here's my cat as well. So there has to be this system within where there is a punishment and a set of rules and a set of law, code of behavior. I mean, like, even, codes of behavior are as ancient as the species. Like, you can go back in history, pre-Christianity, pre-Israelite society, and you can find codes of behavior written into almost, wherever humans congregate into a society, there seems to be this set of law or code of behaviors. But, religion has hijacked that into this concept of sin, with the ultimate bad place that people go to. I find it absolutely fascinating how this, how pernicious it is, because it infects basically every single aspect. And it's so easy for a religious leader or thought, a person who, who does a certain school of thought within a religion to hijack morality and to build a completely separate system of thought control and behavior control upon that to impose on people who follow that.
And it's sort of by getting you to imagine that there's somebody watching you all the time. It also in a time, now we can literally watch everybody with CCTV cameras, and there's mechanisms, but I suppose in a time before all of that, they needed to find a way that would be that everybody would self-regulate. But it hasn't worked out terribly well. The witch trials sort of prove that, don't they? When left to themselves, mob rule, or rather getting people to police themselves and one another, hasn't worked out all that well. What is quite interesting, I sometimes do this mind experiment, and I think in the future, if we go towards a Star Trek future, where we no longer are concerned with the things we're concerned with now, we sort of much more outward looking, and everything seems to be egalitarian. If you look at Star Trek, what was I going to say about that? If we go to that, how the anthropologists of that time looking at our moment in history where we've come out of these very dark tribal days, and we've kind of got enough. Some of us have got a knowledge and a view of this more egalitarian future, and others of us are still stuck deep into the tribalism, and we've got this friction point that's very, very real. I mean, jump back 2 centuries ago, and there weren't yous and me sitting around, or if there were, we didn't talk. We shut our mouths because, it's better to shut your mouth than be beaten to death. Thanks.
Exactly.
And then, hopefully a future we go to
the heretics bell or whatever.
Yeah, and hopefully the future we go towards will not have all that tribalism and brutality. And so we had this really when I get sometimes a bit miffed about this, I sometimes think how lucky I am to actually live at this point where I can actually talk to people whose lives are run by superstition and by strange cultural practice of all kinds. And I think I try to turn it in my head and just at least make something of it and think, wow, I'm really lucky to have to be able to, what an anthropologist of the future would do to be in my shoes and study these strange troglodytes.
Bless their hearts,
Yeah.
But that's the thing, it's like I look, this is a very strange journey for me, personally, when I when I just, when I was a new atheist, like I had this searing hate and disdain towards towards religion, and like, because I mean, at the end of the day, I felt conned. Like I really felt conned, and as I mellowed over the years, it's shifted to, I feel a deep empathy for people. I feel a deep empathy for them. Up until the point where they try to impose the religion on me, but when I stand and look at it objectively, it saddens me, and I really feel for these people, because it's such a controlling, and it voids people of their identity and their ability to think independently and to come to their own conclusions. And I think that's my very big objection at this stage. It's just, without that, you see how people blossom, into people who have empathy for even for things that within their religion seems abhorrent, and that they have to wipe out at all costs, like get rid of the unbelievers, convert them, because they're degrading our society, that kind of thing. And I just look at that, and now I feel sad for them. I feel sad for them, and I just go, where is where, it's such a contradiction, because in the one aspect it says, love thy neighbor as thyself. Like it's this big hippie Jesus, with the white robes and the flowers in his hair. And then on the other hand, it instills all this hatred and just division amongst people. So I look at that now, and I'm not so angry at religion anymore. Like I feel sad, like you feel sad when I look at that.
I didn't have your experience, because I didn't come through that religious thing. But I will say one thing, that our entire lives have been colored by Christianity. We live in a Christian country, and so there's always it's been colored. So even a person like me who grew up in a household that didn't push that to the forefront. I didn't have to ever go to church and all that stuff. But I look at these
years of my life I will never get back.
Yeah. But I look at the conservatism, the conservative attitudes that my parents had, which were, although my parents were not religious, their parents were, and it colored, excuse the pun, it colored their view. Living in South Africa and living through the apartheid years, it colored my parents' view on other people. And of course, little boy, you grow up in that household, and you think along those in that same way. You can't help but. And then I went on and I studied I studied myself. I set myself a task of learning a lot of the sciences, a lot about anthropology and about neurology, psychology, sociology, and of course, for me, the biggest one is evolutionary studies, and to then start to appreciate that the long and tortured line, that the flesh that makes me up, the DNA that's in me, has traveled a long, long way to get to me. Kind of makes me sad as well that I'll never have children, that it comes to an end with me, but that's fine. There's plenty of our species going forward. But it made me a very different person, having that more wholesome and that broader perspective. I certainly, my bigotries of all kinds evaporated. We mentioned that previously, was that little article I sent. I don't know if you ever did receive it, the article that I wrote on racism, homophobia, and misogyny being integrated. Now, I was never one. You could never have labeled me any of those three things, but I was knocking on the door. I was there, as I think we all were, 2-3 decades ago. And what opened my eyes was the sciences. So I think there's a lot to be said for the sciences and the appreciation of where we come from, and where we can potentially go to. I mentioned we're leaping around here in thought, but also quite an interesting, and I think this does speak to the morality. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but I've never even seen one of the movies. I've got no interest in seeing it. I don't know what it is. It just turned me off. Was Star Wars. Not interested. Never seen them. Not interested. But I did notice. But
it's epic. You have to watch them.
I absolutely adored Star Trek. Star Trek was, and not the more modern ones. Not the more modern ones. I love the old ones when they're wearing the ill-fitting tracksuits and
they were trailblazers. I mean, like Star Trek they were trailblazers and I mean, even back in the day when that series aired, like there was uproar about, even they had like non-binary characters in there, and, and interracial relationships and interspecies relationships, and there was uproar about that. Like now when you reflect on that in retrospect, it seems like such a trivial thing. Like we've been exposed to so much more.
But where I was going with this is that I noticed then that, and I don't know if you've noticed it or think about it and see if I'm right, but a lot religious people tend to like Star Trek and atheists tend to like the other way around. Religious people tend to like Star Wars and atheists tend to like Star Trek. And I think that it's just that it resonates that Star Wars is a much more top-down. There's some magic, there's a god, and Star Trek is really almost the handbook for secularism.
Exactly.
The gods don't come into it. These guys are traveling around the universe without a second thought for God. They've figured this shit out. They're going forward, and they don't want to interfere with other cultures. That they must walk their own path, and the pacifism and everything else. And I don't know. Look around, see if I'm wrong. That there does seem to be that the people who like Star Wars tend to be religious, and the people who like Star Trek tend to be. I could be wrong. My observation.
No, it's an astute observation. And I think also popular culture has a lot to do with it. The whole Star Wars franchise, it's a very, how can I say, an Americanized type of approach to science fiction, where there is this protagonist, the antagonist, there's the whole storyline. Whereas the Star Trek series is a far more cerebral, serialized approach, and they also have a more diverse character pool to work with. I love Mr. Spock. I just love that cold, hard sense of that's not logical.
I live with one. I'm sitting. My daughter's away for the evening, and I thought I'd come and sit in her bedroom. She's 19 years old, and she's Mr. Spock. She's just everything's very, very logical, and sometimes dinner conversations, she will tell us things that raise our hair, and I go like, "Don't you have a filter?" She goes, "No, but this is real. We have to talk about it." And I'm going like, I'm blushing. She's just terribly matter of fact, logical.
That's nice. Yeah. I mean, there's no. It's like you said earlier. Like we are of the same mind. So there's not really a lot of a conflict in our opinions about this. I just thought it's a very interesting topic to bring up. Because that seems to be the it's not the turning point, but that's the issue, the crux of this whole disagreement that religion seems to have with with atheists. Is like, we just want to sin, we don't want to conform, we don't want to adopt the whole train of thought that they impose on us, and it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. From my side, in conclusion, I just want to remind everybody, if you don't sin, Jesus died for nothing. So go forth and sin.
But I also want to point out that Jesus didn't actually die. It's quite confusing, really. He had a bad weekend. I hadn't thought this one through cleanly. There were so many things run through my mind while you were talking there. Jumped out. Yeah, don't know what it is. We'll never know.
No, exactly. No, I mean, Michael, we should make these. We should make these a weekly institution, and I would love to invite our members as well to participate. Yeah. The more the merrier. The more diverse the opinions, the more diverse the input is, the richer our community will be. So. We'll schedule another one for next Sunday, and when I schedule it, I'll put a link to the StreamYard room in the Facebook post. Please feel free to come and join us. We all can have a conversation together, and experience our community virtually, because I think it's going to be a while until we can actually set up face-to-face meetings again. But yeah, we look forward to hosting more of these, and we'll try to bring something interesting and topical to discuss every time. So I suppose we can just leave it at that, Michael.
One last thought while you were talking, while you were winding up there. Sorry, but I was just thinking, how many sins are actually sins of the religious, or not sins of us? Because, for instance, let's pick one that really does no harm, can only in fact do good, and that's masturbation. For them, huge sin. In reality, does absolutely no harm. It gets some poison out of you. You're no longer mental,
exactly,
and you can get on with your life. Whereas for them, huge sin. But for me, big sin.
Culture, purity culture,
and for me, big sin is being cruel to animals, or being cruel to another culture or race or group of people. That to me is sin. No, to them that's fine. That's acceptable, because it's quite bizarre, really, that many of their sins are things that are completely benign and take place privately and out of the way, and it's a sin, bad thought, bad act. But it was all on your own, and it didn't bother anybody. It's strange. Anyway.
I just have to state for the record, I'm a big fan of sin. I'm a big fan of sin. Yeah.
It's not that I can't resist.
You've tried it. Yeah.
I just don't want to resist. I could. I don't want to. I go out of my way to encounter it.
We are just degenerate atheists. Like no sense of morals. We just want to walk around pillaging, stealing. Get the fuck out of here with that nonsense.
All right, lekker, Dean. Thank you. Oh, and today, quickly, I went for a bike ride around, and I did about 300 kilometers. I went up the East Coast, and we wrapped around it. I've got to say again, I've lived in the city my entire life. This has got to be the most beautiful city on the planet. Unbelievable. It's amazing.
Funny that you mentioned that. I was out and about this week. I traveled up to Paarl, and the landscapes. I was there around Spice Root Winery. I mean, like, the landscape is it's this verdant shade of chloroform at the moment. It's just incredibly beautiful to behold.
We are lucky. We are lucky.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool, man. Thanks for the chat. Yeah, we'll catch you on the flip side.
Lekker. Thanks, Dean. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.